in that space. When the process itself is finished, I'm not sure. And I don't know what will dictate it, whether it will be that I'm just not interested in finding out more, or whether the world is not interested in seeing the work anymore.
That's a possibility.
Maybe one of these.
There's a question to the back.
Yeah, I'm wondering, the sort of sources, the crew members or people who experienced it firsthand, do you have any reactions from them on your work, or do they see the work?
They didn't actually see an installation, but I have shown them images of the work, and they can sort of relate to it in a way that people relate to art. It's sort of like as an art form, they find it difficult to engage with, but obviously they have a very particular relationship to the material, and they're excited that this material is shown, is shown in a public way, because they do feel that it was an extremely important event in their own lives, and it has kind of not been acknowledged historically. So they do appreciate that it sort of has it has a sort of official face, or a kind of not official but a public face. They do appreciate that for sure. But also, I mean, another aspect in relation to the work is that I did conduct a lot of interviews which are not part of the work. So there is a lot of kind of research which informs the work, and the decisions I make in relation to it, but it's not actually a part of it. So there's a lot of material I got from them, including interviews, that has kind of is not present.
Can I make a comment also about the exhibition and your collaboration, which I find very interesting, and that also tells a lot about what happens when you're completely engulfed by a subject. And that is that when you started to collaborate, you didn't really know so much about each other's work, and because the planned exhibition in Alexandria was postponed twice actually because of the revolution, you got some extra spare time to do research together, and this connected your work in a very interesting way, because Celine was doing the research on the cotton industry, Egyptian cotton industry, and you were doing your Suez Canal and Port Said and Lesseps, and suddenly you started to work on a collaborative work where the two subjects met, and what that was the cotton bourse, how do you say bourse?
Cotton exchange.
The cotton exchange in Alexandria, which has now been torn down, but that was like in the middle of the city, and that was also where Nasser, after the revolution, proclaimed the Suez Canal as a national asset. So suddenly it meets the two works, and I find that quite remarkable actually.
Yeah.
That's the same place.
It's one historical
The parking
event.
lot.
I mean, we had this at the end. We thought it was too long, the talk. But yeah, I mean, regardless of us meeting as people, then there's a point. You know, it's quite amazing when you've got a point in history when two projects meet. So Nasser stood on the balcony of the Cotton Stock Exchange to announce the nationalization of the Suez Canal. He was announcing two things, right? He was announcing the end of the colonial period, the beginning of the Egyptian project, the independence of Egypt, and he was also announcing the end of speculation on cotton production. So that's why the stock exchange was torn down. Once an industry is nationalized, you don't need a stock exchange anymore, but it also means that foreigners can't speculate on the value of your industry. Now this place, which is now a car park, of course, is a physical meeting of our project, and also a place that starts a collaborative piece, as Marianne said, which is actually the central room of the exhibition. where, yeah, it's the only piece in which our authorships are together. You know. And it's impossible by now to remember who's done what exactly.
There were two questions.
I have one observation, like in terms of your like legibility of your works, as I have not seen any video, not measured any photographs, but I only can see both of you guys like talking next to each other. So I was just thinking, what do you think about like performative aspect, the way you representing your work when physically, like, do you consider these things? Performative aspect?
First of all, we've never done a talk together. This is like the absolute first time, so it's also a rehearsal of sorts. I don't know, I mean, there's many ways to answer a question like this, you know, like both Uriel and I do quite a lot of public speaking in separate ways. Uriel does a lot of public sort of performance lectures. I mean, I'm not going to talk for you, but the idea of the format, you know, the fact that the work takes place in different formats and public speaking is one of them, is of course very present to me. I know this.
Yeah.
So there's different things, you know, like the fact that we decided not to talk about, first we did this and then we did that, and then we went there and then we did this, but to offer those terms, right? So it was more a way of focusing the talk on practice. So the performativity, I would say, had to do with rooting this in practice, right? Terms that are important to us, that we work with, and how they take place in our respective, and sometimes together, in our joint practices. I don't
And
know.
then also in relate, kind of specifically here, there was obviously a consideration that the work will open tomorrow.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
the choice of images was quite specific.
Yeah, we're not going to show you
that
everything that
situation.
you're going to see tomorrow. That would be ridiculous and also a little bit sad. So, yeah, but I mean, I think, to be honest, I think it's a question we should be asking you, because you're the one who's been sitting in the talk, who's been doing the talk. So,
Yeah, it's like it's became also a bit obvious when just you guys gone through the interview session each other. So just making sure this maybe say like performative one possible form. Yeah. That.
Just what I was curious about those ships in cargo, if it was empty or what was actually, I mean, you talked about cotton and before, like, amount of the products,
Yeah.
basically, which are normal shipping. So this,
Yeah, it's a hugely important element because the cargo was also one of the reasons why. The cargo was also one of the reasons why the ships were not just abandoned, apart from the value of the ships themselves to the insurance companies. But there were textiles, there was a lot of material on the ships, and the Suez Canal was sort of the key trade route from Asia to Europe, and it was where the oil was transported. What I focused on mostly was the stuff that was being used or recycled by the crews who kind of started to go into the stocks. So, for example, there was one ship that had a few tons of apples, and they started sharing these apples. Another ship had a few million eggs. And there is actually quite an interesting story in relation to the apples, which feature in the work, but sort of in quite an enigmatic way, where they had these apples and started to share them amongst each other and barter kind of with whatever other ships had and exchange. But eventually the captain realized that the apples will end up rotting. So he offered them to Nasser as a gift for the military that was stationed on the shore of the Suez Canal. And President Nasser, apparently being quite a proud man, said, "If I want apples, I'll buy them, thank you very much." Upon which they decided to throw them overboard.
Instead of selling them to him.
You could have done
Probably
cider.
So the cargo was kind of both in a global perspective. It was important that the flow of capital was stopped and it had huge consequences. The devaluation of the British pound was one of them. The increase in size of ships, because the ships had to go round the African Horn, which means that they decided to build larger ships. And when the Suez Canal eventually reopened in 1975, the ships didn't fit anymore, and they had to make the canal larger and deeper for the ships to fit. And then there's kind of the internal things with one of the Swedish ships had textiles on them, and they started using the textiles to make sailing boats out of the kind of emergency boats. They kind of created sails and had regattas and things like that. So the kind of notion of recycling the cargo was something that I was quite interested in.
Yeah.
I wonder how your audience, the viewers, Egyptian artists or whoever went to see the show in Alexandria, how they reacted to or responded to the fact that you, as non-Egyptians, come into a country and dig into their archives and talk about their history and so on.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to this question of positioning
Yeah,
that we were talking about earlier, and what right, if any, does one have to speak about something? Now, in relationship to the story of the ships, what for me was interesting was that this story is not actually owned by anyone. It's not an Egyptian thing. It's not, and the ships were international. And I was talking about this to people. I found one person in Egypt that had no contact with the ships. I did find people who had contact with the ships, but I only found one person who had no contact with the ships and knew about the story. No one else. And this person was also interested in it and said, we should try to make a film in Egypt. But the problem is, how do we sell it to the Egyptians, because there weren't Egyptian ships. So it was kind of happening there, but at the same time it was not theirs either, and it was not anyone else's in a way. So I was quite interested in that, in this sort of in-between space of, and in relation to the archives, I mean, I did make other works as well, which are more connected to the Suez Canal and to Lesseps, the mastermind of the Suez Canal. And there was quite interesting reaction by people, I mean, also artists, who felt that it almost needs a foreigner sometimes to come in and start looking through archives, because people have been so intimidated by not having any access, and by knowing that it's really difficult, and by feeling threatened, much more threatened than a foreigner who has much less to lose. If you go there and somebody gets suspicious, you are let off the hook much more quickly. So I think there's a different relationship to that material. And then I can only say about the exhibitions, there was a lot of local interest as well, especially in Cairo, but also in Alexandria. People were very interested in seeing the work, and kind of newspapers wrote about it. And do you want to add something?
Maybe just like on a level of anecdote, there's a very big difference between working in Cairo and working in Alexandria. Alexandria is a really, really isolated, very, I guess, peripheral city compared to Cairo, also in the sense of what it feels like when you're a foreigner walking in the street. There's just not so many foreigners. Especially as a woman, you really feel that. But I never got that, I never got the, what right do you have to be here or to talk about this? Who are you? But what I did get quite a lot was the opposite, was, why do you want to make a project here? Everybody wants to get out. Like why do you want to spend time in a city like this? So, I mean, it's just an anecdote, but just to say that actually a lot of the hesitations, in my case, really came from me, much more than they came from what I encountered. And also that it's always inevitably wrong to make assumptions about what other people are going to think. You just cannot make these assumptions.
But I would also suggest that even though you're looking at Egyptian history, it's never entirely you can't delimit who owns the history, because it's obviously, I mean, in both of your cases, very clear that it's a history that's you know, tightly connected to the British imperialism and economic interests and so on. So
Of course.
for me, it's quite clear that, you know, why you would be interested in this history, because it's related to your own country's history and politics. But even generally, I would suggest that it's not that
I'm from Switzerland, by the way.
Okay, but you had but you were saying yourself the community of boats was like an international group of
Yeah.
boats. Yeah. But
Actually, neither one of us is British.
you live in London.
We live in
though.
London.
Yeah, we both live in
Yeah.
London.
You're tainted.
And you were both. Yeah, anyway, no, but my point would actually be to go even further, that indeed no one has the right, more a right to talk about some history than another, but you have to be aware of the position that you have when you do this. And we were just written, in fact, in Alexandria. I don't know if you were told we visited.
Yeah, we
almost
heard,
there.
I think yesterday.
You
were
came back.
You were there yesterday, yes.
And you realise that there's not exactly thousands of people who go and visit.
No.
On
But what we
every
also
basis.
noticed was that, and maybe this is more true with regards to Cairo than Alexandria, that Egyptian artists are actually quite resistant to working on things that are specifically Egyptian, because there's a lot of exoticism and tokenism coming from Western curators that come in.
Yeah, which goes back to this idea of performing
Yeah.
one's identity.
Yeah, so they actually might not want to work
Yes.
the way that you do, or
Mm.
with that material,
Mm.
because that would be so typical and would be so, you know, helpful to the Western curator that comes in and wants to get some exotic, authentic Egyptian artists to work in their show,
Mm.
colonialism or whatever, imperialism. So I think it's actually quite interesting, this positioning of yours with regards to the material.
Mm.
But I was just curious whether you had
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
any conversations or reactions on this. But the point of, excuse me, of being, you know, treading on territory that's quite unsettling to the regime, even the current one, and that you have a privileged position as a foreigner, that makes it easier for you to work on with this material than it would be for Egyptians, who would be risking much more.
Mm.
That's also it's a
Mm.
valid point.
And it's also something I think, I mean, quite practically I was very aware of with the people I was collaborating with and who were helping me. You can't do a project like that without people helping you. And for example, the Suez Canal is a military zone, and it's actually illegal to take a single photograph of it, let alone film there. So for me it was very clear I could not be, I would not be able to film there without the help of people. And the kind of the people I could think of that were the best place to help me were the fishermen who were living next to this kind of large area of water in the middle of the Suez Canal where the ships pass each other. We went to great lengths to kind of secure them that I wouldn't be discovered, because it would be much more of a problem for them. And we had to cancel the trip. I mean, it was like at 5 a.m. going out with the fisher boats, and they're quite well placed, that they sort of have their intelligence around the Suez Canal, how much security there is on a day in relation to what is passing through the canal. If it's like military or arms and things like that, there is increased security, and they find out about that, and we had to cancel this trip a number of times because there would be too much security and it would be too risky for them to do it. So yeah, that was totally something really, really important.
Infinite patience. But I can.
There's only about 2 minutes of it in the entire work, but there you go. I think there was some.
My question was
Okay.
Well, then maybe we should stop.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
See you tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah. Please come tomorrow.
Oh yeah, please come to the opening tomorrow.